They called her Hannah, and that was all anyone ever called her, not because it was her name. Names were given, taken, bent, and broken here, but because it was simple, short, and easy to say when issuing orders. Hannah worked best when she did not answer back, when her eyes stayed lowered and her hands moved quickly, when her presence became so ordinary it slipped past notice. In Alabama, in a place where heat pressed down like a hand on the back of the neck, invisibility was the closest thing to safety she had ever known. Wait a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling story. The quarters lay behind the main house, arranged like an afterthought. They were built of rough wood that splintered if you brushed it wrong, roofs patched with mismatched boards, windows that let in more dust than light. At night, cicadas screamed in the trees as if the land itself could not keep quiet. Hannah learned to measure time by those sounds. The rising chorus at dusk, the steady drone deep into the dark hours, the brief hush just before dawn. Silence was rare, and when it came, it meant something was about to happen. She had arrived years earlier, young enough that memory blurred at the edges. There were pieces she still held. Her mother's voice, low and steady, telling her to count breaths when fear came, the smell of river water, a song half forgotten. Everything else had been worn away by work and watching and waiting. Waiting was what she did best. It was what she had been trained to do without anyone ever calling it training. Each morning began before the sun cleared the trees. Hannah rose with the others, the day already heavy with heat, and stepped into the routine that never changed. Water fetched, floors scrubbed, food prepared and carried, never tasted unless permission was given or scraps were dropped. The main house loomed ahead, white and wide, with columns that looked strong from a distance and cracked when you stood close enough to see. The house had moods. Some days it slept, quiet and heavy. Other days it snapped awake, sharp and demanding, and those were the days everyone feared. The master liked order. He liked knowing where things were, how they moved, when they would appear before him. He liked the locks on his doors, the sound they made when turned, the certainty they promised. Hannah learned early that he trusted objects more than people. Objects did not lie, did not plead, did not remember. Objects stayed where they were placed. People, he believed, were always looking for ways to slip free. So he watched them. He watched Hannah, or rather he thought he did. Hannah learned how to be seen without being noticed. She kept her head bowed just enough, her pace steady, her voice soft. She answered when spoken to and did not answer when she wasn't. She did not cry out when pain came. She swallowed it and stored it away somewhere deep. Pain could not be allowed to spill over. Pain drew attention. Attention was dangerous. At night, when the quarters finally quieted, she lay awake and listened. She listened to footsteps crossing the yard, to doors opening and closing in the main house, to the occasional shout carried by the wind. She listened until she could tell who was moving by the sound alone. The master's steps were heavy and sure, unhurried, confident that the ground would always be there beneath him. The overseers were quick, impatient, angry. Hannah memorized the rhythms without meaning to, as if her mind collected them the way her hands collected, splinters. She did not plan then, not in any way that could be named. Planning felt too close to hope, and hope was dangerous. Hope had a way of rising up only to be crushed. Instead, Hannah practiced patience. She let the days stack up one on top of another until they blurred together. She observed. She learned. There were rules here, even if they were not written down. The master dined at the same time each evening. The house settled into quiet after midnight. Certain doors were locked, always. Certain ones were not. Hannah noticed which locks were checked twice and which were trusted to habit. She noticed which keys were carried and which were left hanging. She noticed how storms changed everything. How rain made the house uneasy, how thunder loosened routines just enough to reveal small cracks. The first time she realized she was remembering these details on purpose, the thought frightened her. She pushed it away. Survival meant staying small, staying harmless. Survival meant enduring, but endurance had a way of reshaping itself. There were moments, brief, sharp, that cut through the sameness. A glance held too long, a hand placed where it should not be, a punishment delivered not for disobedience, but for sport. Those moments did not disappear when they ended. They stayed with her, stacking up alongside the details of doors and locks and footsteps. The mind, Hannah learned, could hold many things at once. One afternoon, while scrubbing the hallway floor, she noticed a hairline crack near the back door frame. She had passed that door hundreds of times, but only then did she see how the wood had shifted, how the latch did not sit perfectly anymore. It was a small thing, meaningless really. Still, she remembered it. That night the cicadas were louder than usual. The air pressed close, thick and wet, promising a storm. Hannah lay on her thin pallet, staring up at the ceiling where shadows moved with every flicker of distant lightning. Around her, others slept fitfully. Someone coughed. Someone whispered a prayer. Hannah closed her eyes and counted her breaths, just as her mother had once taught her. 1, 2, 3. With each breath, images surfaced, not of escape, not of freedom, but of the house as it truly was. Not grand, not unbreakable, just wood and iron and habits stacked on top of fear. She saw the master moving through his rooms, confident in the world he had built. She saw the locks, the doors, the spaces between them. Patience, she realized, was not just waiting. Patience was learning without being caught learning. It was letting knowledge settle quietly until it felt like instinct. Patience could sharpen. The storm broke just before dawn. Rain hammered the roofs, drowning out the cicadas, flattening the world into sound and water. When Hannah rose that morning, the yard was mud, the air cool for once. The house felt different, unsettled, as if it had been shaken awake. The master complained of damp floors and slow work. His temper snapped faster than usual. Hannah kept her head down. As the day wore on, small changes appeared. Windows were shut against the rain. Candles were moved. The back door, the one with the imperfect latch, was used more often because it kept the worst of the wet outside. Hannah passed through it twice, then 3 times, each time feeling the latch catch a little less firmly. She did not touch it. She did not test it. She only noticed. That evening she carried a tray down the hallway, the weight familiar in her arms. The master sat in his chair, boots off, attention fixed elsewhere. He did not look at her. That too was something Hannah learned to recognize. When he did not look, it meant he felt certain. Certain of control, certain of order. Certainty made people careless. After dinner, as the house settled, Hannah was dismissed earlier than usual. The storm had tired everyone. She returned to the quarters, her muscles aching, her mind restless. Sleep did not come easily. Instead, she listened again, to the softened sounds, to the altered rhythms. Rain still fell, steady now, masking footsteps, smoothing edges. In the darkness, Hannah allowed herself one dangerous thought. What if waiting was almost over? She did not answer it. She did not act on it. She only let it exist briefly, like a spark that could be smothered if necessary. Before dawn, she rose once more. The air smelled clean, washed. Mud clung to her feet as she walked. The house stood quiet, breathing slowly. Hannah paused near the B. Ack door, the cracked frame barely visible in the low light. Her hand hovered near the latch. She did not open it, not yet. She stepped back, heart steady, and returned to her work as if nothing had happened. No one noticed. No one imagined anything had changed, but something had, because patience, once sharpened, did not dull again. It waited, it learned, and remembered. The next time Hannah passed the back door, she did not look at it directly. She had learned that the quickest way to be noticed was to behave like you had something to hide. People who were watched for a living could sense the smallest shifts, an extra glance, a pause that lasted a heartbeat too long. So Hannah kept her eyes on the floorboards as she always did. She carried a basket of linens as she always did. She moved at the same pace, shoulders slightly rounded, expression empty in the way the house preferred. The latch and the crack in the frame stayed in her vision only as a blur at the edge of things, but her mind touched it like a fingertip. Not yet, she told herself. Not because she lacked courage. Courage was a word for people who had choices, but because she understood something more important than courage, timing. Timing was the difference between a door and a trap. The storm had washed the yard clean, but it had not washed the house's habits clean. By the second day, everything returned to its usual shape. The master's breakfast at the same hour. His complaints delivered with the same lazy certainty. The overseer's voice rising and falling like a whip, even when the whip was not in his hand. The women in the kitchen moving quietly. The men in the fields moving because stopping meant punishment. The world clicked back into place as if the storm had only been a brief dream. Hannah moved with it. In the morning she scrubbed and swept, and in the afternoon she carried and folded and fetched. She kept the master's shirts crisp, his boots polished, his cups clean enough to reflect his face. She listened without appearing to listen. She watched without appearing to watch. Waiting, she reminded herself, was not the absence of action. Waiting was action done slowly. At night the quarters settled into their uneasy sleep. Hannah lay on her pallet and listened to her own breath again. 1, 2, 3, and then beyond it to everything the darkness offered. The house had a language. Wood creaked in certain corners. A window rattled when the wind came from the east. The kitchen door sighed when it swung closed because its hinge was worn. Hannah learned these sounds until she could tell when something changed, even slightly, and that was how she knew the master was restless. It began with little things. He walked later into the night, his heavy steps crossing the hallway after midnight when he normally stayed in his room. He ordered candles moved into different holders. He asked for his keys more often, jingling them in his hand as if the sound soothed him. He had not seen the crack in the back door frame. Hannah was sure of it. He never looked at the frame, only at the lock. But something about the storm had left him unsettled, like a man who dreams of falling and wakes with his heart racing. That unease could work in Hannah's favor or crush her. She did not know which, so she watched it carefully, the way you watch a snake you cannot yet kill. One afternoon, Hannah was kneeling near the pantry sorting dried beans into a bowl while the cook argued quietly with another woman about rationing. The master's voice carried from the other room. It was not loud, but it had that edge it sometimes took, the edge of a man who believed himself wronged by the world. "Things have been careless," he said. "I don't like carelessness." "Yes, sir," someone replied, one of the household men perhaps. Hannah did not lift her head to confirm. "Doors left where they ought not," the master continued. "Tools not where they belong." Hannah's fingers tightened around a B. "Een." She forced them to relax. The cook hissed a warning under her breath. "Don't listen." And Hannah gave the smallest nod without looking up. Her face stayed blank. Her hands kept working. Later, when she carried a tray to the dining room, she saw the master's keys on the table beside him. He toyed with them as if they were a charm. His gaze flicked toward the back hallway once, then away. He noticed the movement of the house. He sensed, perhaps, that his control depended on routines he could not fully see. The house was a machine, and the master was afraid of it breaking. Hannah took that fear and tucked it into the growing map in her mind. That night, she did something she had not done before. She counted not her breaths, but the minutes between sounds. The master's footsteps crossed the hallway at 11. A pause. A chair scrape at 11:10. Another pause. The soft clink of metal at 11:15. Keys, likely. Then silence until midnight, when the overseer crossed the yard and shouted at someone too slow to move away from the rain barrel. The shout faded. Silence again. Hannah stared into the darkness and let each sound become a mark on an invisible page. If she could predict the house, she could move within it. If she could move within it, she could... She stopped herself. The thought rose too high, too fast. Freedom was a word you did not speak in the quarters. It was a word that made people reckless, and reckless people vanished. Still, the map was becoming clearer in the days that followed. Hannah tested herself in ways so small no one else would have called them tests. She left a cloth folded in a place she normally wouldn't, just to see if anyone noticed. She placed a spoon slightly out of line among the others. She watched how quickly the cook corrected it, how the cook's eyes darted to the doorway first. The cook had her own map, Hannah realized. Everyone did, in their own way. Survival demanded it. She tested doors too, but not the way the master feared. When she passed through the kitchen door, she listened for the hinge's sigh and noted whether it sounded looser or tighter that day. When she opened the pantry, she paid attention to how far it swung before it caught. When she walked near the back door, she let the air brushing through the crack touch her skin and told herself exactly how wide it must be. No hands on the latch. Not yet. The master's restlessness sharpened into suspicion. He began to call household workers to him for small questions that weren't really questions. Where had the broom gone? Who had moved the lamp? Why was the window unlatched? Sometimes he asked Hannah directly. She answered with the same softness every time. "I don't know, sir." "Yes, sir." "No, sir." He looked at her like a man trying to see through fog. Hannah lowered her eyes and became fog. The most dangerous thing about suspicion was how it infected everything. Even kindness, rare as it was, could become a trap. A softer tone, a gift of leftover food, a word that sounded almost gentle. Hannah had learned long ago that such moments did not mean you were safe. They meant someone wanted something from you. They meant you were being used in a different way. So she accepted nothing. She took no extra. She stepped carefully around anything that looked like a path offered too easily. Still, she could feel the line tightening around the household like a rope pulled slowly taut. One evening, as the sky turned the color of bruised peaches, the master announced he would have guests the next day. Guests meant extra work, extra eyes, extra chances to be blamed for anything that went wrong. The kitchen turned frantic. The cook snapped at everyone. The younger girls were sent to wash and scrub until their hands cracked. Hannah was told to clean the parlor, polish the silver, sweep the front steps. She did it all. But as she worked, she watched the house fill with movement. The master's men carried chairs and rugs, shifting furniture. Windows were opened, then shut again. Candles were arranged in rows. The back hallway, usually quiet in the evening, became busy with servants hurrying in and out. Busy spaces were dangerous. Busy spaces were also cover. Hannah kept her head down and let the bustle hide her thinking. The night before the guests arrived, the master stayed awake later than usual. She heard him in the parlor, speaking to the overseer in low tones. Hannah could not catch every word, but she caught enough to understand the shape of it. "Don't like how they look at things," the master said. "They're just talking," the overseer replied, uncertain. "Talking becomes trouble," the master snapped. "I want everything tight, everything watched." Hannah's stomach turned cold. She realized then that the master's suspicion was not random. It was aimed outward at first, at rumors, at people passing by, at the world beyond his land, but it was turning inward, turning toward the very people who kept his house standing. If he decided someone was trouble, it would not matter whether they had done anything. Trouble was a label that could kill. That night, Hannah did not sleep. She lay still, eyes open, and let her mind run along the map again. Doors, locks, keys, sounds, storms, shifts. She pictured the cracked frame of the back door and imagined how a latch might slip if pushed just right. She imagined what the yard looked like in darkness, how the fence line ran, where the trees began to thicken into woods. She imagined, too, what it would mean to be caught halfway. A sound rose in her throat, something between a sob and a laugh, but she swallowed it down. Emotion was dangerous. Emotion pushed people to act too quickly. She needed patience. She needed control. At dawn, the house erupted into preparation for the guests. Hannah moved through the noise like a shadow. She carried water, set plates, wiped fingerprints from glass. The master was in a better mood now, wearing his public face. Public faces were polished like his boots, shiny, hard, reflecting nothing true. The guests arrived near noon. Hannah caught glimpses, men in clean coats, women with stiff skirts, laughter that sounded sharp. They sat in the parlor drinking and talking while servants drifted through like furniture. Hannah served tea and kept her eyes down, but she listened. The men talked about land and crops and politics in a way that suggested those things belonged only to them. They joked about storms. They laughed about keeping order. One of them mentioned that patrols had been increased in nearby counties. Another said runaways were being hunted harder now. Hannah held the teapot steady, though her hands threatened to shake. Patrols. Hunting. Increased watch. If she waited too long, the rope would tighten until there was no space left to slip through. The realization did not make her reckless. It made her clear. That evening, after the guests had eaten and drunk and left, the house was exhausted. Servants moved slower. The cook's anger faded into dull fatigue. The master retreated to his room early, satisfied with his performance. The yard grew quiet. Rain began again, lightly at first, then steadier. Another storm, as if the sky had decided to repeat itself. The sound softened the world. It covered footsteps. It made the fence posts glisten darkly. It made the air smell like wet earth and possibility. Hannah found herself in the back hallway with a stack of plates. She paused, only for a moment, at the door with the cracked frame. This time her hand reached out, not to open it, just to feel the latch. Her fingertips brushed the metal, cool, slick, familiar in shape though she had never touched it before. She could feel the looseness, the slight give. The way it did not sit perfectly, her breath caught. She forced herself to let go and keep walking. But she carried the sensation with her, like a key hidden in the skin of her hand. Later, when the house hold finally settled, Hannah returned to the quarters. People were too tired to talk much. Someone muttered about the guests. Someone else muttered a prayer. Hannah lay down and stared into the darkness. The map in her mind was no longer just observation. It had become intent. She did not know exactly when she would move. She did not know exactly how the next steps would unfold. But she knew this. Waiting had taught her the house's weaknesses, and patience, sharpened patience, had become a weapon she could finally hold. Rain had a way of changing the rules. It softened edges, blurred lines, and made the world feel less certain to those who depended on certainty. By the time night fell again, the storm had settled into a steady, patient rhythm, as if it meant to stay. The quarters were quieter than usual. Exhaustion weighed on everyone after the long day of guests and performance. Even fear, it seemed, had grown tired. Hannah lay still on her pallet, eyes open, listening. The rain on the roof was constant now, a low roar that filled the spaces between sounds. Footsteps became guesses instead of facts. Voices turned into shapes without clear edges. The house breathed differently under rain, less sharp, less watchful. Or perhaps that was what Hannah wanted to believe. She waited, not because she was unsure, but because waiting was how she kept control. Control over her body, control over her thoughts, control over the dangerous rush that threatened to push her forward too fast. She counted the sounds instead of her breaths this time. The master's door closed earlier than usual. The overseer crossed the yard once, his steps hurried, then did not return. Silence. Hannah rose slowly, easing her weight onto her feet as if the floor itself might protest. She moved past the sleeping forms around her, careful not to disturb the air. At the doorway of the quarters, she paused. Rain spilled down in silver lines beyond the threshold. The yard was dark, the path barely visible, but Hannah knew it well enough to walk it blind. She stepped outside. Mud sucked at her feet, cold and thick, but she welcomed it. Mud slowed pursuit. Mud erased clean footprints. She kept close to the edge of the quarters, then crossed the open space toward the back of the main house, where shadows pooled thickest against the wall. The back hallway door stood ahead of her, its outline faint against the pale wood. Hannah stopped several steps away. She did not rush forward. Rushing made noise. Rushing made mistakes. She listened. Rain. Nothing else. The house, exhausted from the day, seemed asleep. Even the sounds Hannah knew so well, the sigh of the kitchen door, the creak of certain boards, were swallowed by the storm. She took one step closer, then another, each movement measured. When she reached the door, she did not touch it immediately. She pressed her ear lightly against the wood. Silence, no voices, no movement, only the rain and the soft thud of her own heart, steady and controlled. She exhaled slowly and raised her hand. The latch felt exactly as she remembered, cool, worn smooth by years of use. Her fingers closed around it, testing the weight without moving it. She could feel the looseness now, unmistakable. The metal did not sit snug in its place. It was a small flaw, but flaws were openings. She applied just enough pressure to feel resistance. Then she stopped. A voice in her mind, quiet but sharp, reminded her of everything that could go wrong. A shout, a sudden light, a hand on her shoulder. The weight of consequences crashing down faster than she could move. Hannah loosened her grip and waited again. This was not the moment to open the door fully. This was the moment to learn how it behaved. She pressed the latch once more, firmer this time, and felt it shift. The sound it made was barely there, a soft, uncertain click, lost in the rain. Hannah froze, counting the seconds in her head. 1, 2, 3, nothing happened. She let the latch rise back into place. The door remained closed, but now she knew something important. It would not scream when asked to open. It would not announce itself, loudly. It would yield quietly, if treated with care. That knowledge sent a strange calm through her. Not relief, not excitement, clarity. She stepped back from the door and returned to the quarters the same way she had come, retracing her path, erasing herself as best she could. When she lay down again, her body felt different, lighter, sharper, as if something inside her had aligned. She did not sleep. Instead, she watched the darkness shift as the night wore on. Once, far off, a voice shouted. Someone else, somewhere else, dealing with their own fear. It faded quickly. The rain continued. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world rinsed and quiet. Hannah rose with the others as usual. No one looked at her differently. No one called her name. No one suspected that anything had changed. But everything had. The door had stayed closed, but it had also stayed open in her mind. Throughout the day, Hannah moved through her work with a new awareness. Every task felt doubled now. What she did, and what she learned while doing it. She noticed how the house felt after a storm. Damp but sluggish, as if it took longer to wake. She noticed how the master complained less, lulled into a sense of safety by the absence of obvious trouble. Safety made people careless. She noticed something else too. The master's keys were not always where she expected them to be. Sometimes they were on the table, sometimes they were tucked into his coat, and sometimes, rarely, they were left hanging on a hook near the back hallway when he moved through the house, without his jacket. Hannah did not stare at the keys. She noted them the way one notes the weather, without comment, without reaction. That afternoon, she was sent to clean the storage room near the back hallway. It was a small room, rarely used, filled with broken furniture and tools that no one trusted anymore. Dust coated everything. Hannah swept slowly, deliberately, listening to the sounds around her. The hook was empty. The master was not wearing his coat. Her pulse quickened, but she forced it to slow. This was not an invitation. This was information. Information only mattered if it was remembered, not acted upon blindly. She finished her task and left the room, keeping her eyes down. As she passed through the hallway, she heard the master's voice in the parlor, laughing with someone, perhaps a neighbor, perhaps a visiting friend. Laughter meant distraction. Distraction meant opportunity. Hannah did not take it. Not yet. That night she lay awake again, the pattern repeating. Rain did not come this time. The air was heavy and still. Without the storm's cover, the house's sounds sharpened. Footsteps carried farther. Doors creaked louder. Hannah stayed where she was. She was learning something just as important as how to open a door, when not to. The next evening brought another small shift. The cook fell ill, leaving the kitchen understaffed. Hannah was called in to help later than usual. The work stretched past midnight. By the time the last pot was scrubbed, the house was deep in sleep. The back hallway lay empty. Hannah stood at the edge of it, hands wet, apron damp, heart steady. She listened carefully. The silence was real this time. Not the false quiet of tension, but the deep stillness of exhaustion. She moved. Her steps were soft, practiced. She reached the door and placed her hand on the latch without hesitation. The metal yielded again, smoothly. She lifted it just enough to free the door from its hold. The door opened a fraction of an inch. Cool air slipped inside, carrying the smell of wet earth and trees. Hannah froze, holding the door in place, listening for any reaction. None came. She opened it another inch, then another. The yard lay before her, dark and open. The fenk. E-line was visible, a shadow against shadows. Beyond it, trees gathered thickly, their leaves whispering softly even without wind. Hannah did not step outside. She closed the door again, carefully, returning the latch to its place. The door did not protest. It accepted the lie that it had never been opened. Hannah leaned her forehead briefly against the wood, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. It was possible. The realization did not come with joy. It came with weight. Possibility was heavy. Possibility demanded decisions. She returned to the quarters, her movements as quiet as ever. Sleep found her at last, shallow and dreamless. Over the next days she repeated the test, never, twice in a row, never at the same time. Sometimes she only touched the latch. Sometimes she opened the door a finger's width. Once, she opened it enough to step 1 foot outside, then stepped back in. Each time, the house remained unaware. Each time, Hannah's confidence grew. Not reckless confidence, but the calm certainty that comes from understanding something completely. The door was not watched. The latch was trusted. The master believed in his locks, not in the spaces around them. He believed the world behaved as it always had. That belief was his weakness. One afternoon, Hannah overheard the overseer complaining about rumors again. Patrols were closer now, he said. People were being questioned. The master responded with irritation, insisting his household was in order. Hannah scrubbed the floor nearby and listened. In order, she thought, order was a story people told themselves when they wanted to feel safe. That night, Hannah lay awake, staring into the dark. The map in her mind had gained a new line, a clear path from inside to out. But the map did not end at the door. Beyond it lay woods, roads, patrols, dogs, people who would help and people who would betray. The door was only the beginning. She turned her head slightly, listening to the breathing around her, to the quiet lives pressed close. She thought of those who could not leave, who did not know what she knew, who might pay for her movement if she was careless. The thought sharpened her resolve rather than weakening it. If she moved, she had to disappear completely. No noise, no trace, no reason left behind. She waited one more night, and then another. Each time the door waited too, patient and ready, as if it understood what it had become. On the 4th night, the air felt different again. Heavy clouds rolled in, though rain had not yet begun. The house settled early. The master locked himself in with his certainty and his keys. The yard darkened, shadows thickening. Hannah rose from her pallet and knew, without excitement or fear, that the waiting had ended. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She moved. She moved. The door opened without protest, as if it had been waiting for her hand all along. Hannah stepped through it fully this time, not pausing at the threshold, not looking back. The night closed behind her with a soft click as she eased the door shut, returning the latch to its place the way she had practiced. The house accepted the lie of stillness. Outside, the yard breathed. Clouds pressed low, muting the moon. The air was thick and warm, promising rain that had not yet begun. Hannah stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, letting the dark reveal itself in layers. The fence line lay ahead, a familiar shadow. Trees waited beyond, their leaves barely stirring. Everything was exactly where she expected it to be. That was how she knew she was ready. She crossed the yard, feet finding firmer ground near the edges where the mud was thinner. She moved slowly, not because she was afraid, but because speed belonged to panic, and panic belonged to mistakes. Her body remembered the path, her mind stayed ahead of it, marking distances, listening for sounds. None came. The house behind her loomed silent and unaware. It felt strange to T. Think of it that way, as something that could be fooled, something that could be left behind. For years it had been the center of her world, the place where everything happened to her. Now it was only a structure of wood and habit, shrinking with every step she took away from it. She reached the fence and stopped. The fence was old, its boards uneven. She had touched it before, leaned against it while working, memorized where it sagged and where it held firm. She slipped between two boards where the gap widened, just enough if you turned sideways. The wood scraped lightly against her shoulder, leaving a mark she would carry with her, a reminder of where she had passed through. Beyond the fence the ground dipped slightly, sloping toward the trees. Hannah moved into their cover and felt the world change around her. The air cooled, the smells shifted, less dust, more earth and leaves. Sound behaved differently here, absorbed instead of carried. She walked until the house was no longer visible, until even its outline disappeared behind the trees. Only then did she stop and let herself breathe deeply. This was the moment she had imagined, and avoided imagining in equal measure. The moment when escape became real, the moment when she might have felt triumph or fear or joy. She felt none of those. What she felt was weight, because escape was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Hannah knew the land beyond the trees better than most would have guessed. She had walked its edges under supervision, learned its rhythms from a distance. She knew which paths led toward roads and which dead-ended in marsh. She knew where the ground turned soft and treacherous after rain. She knew, too, that patrols sometimes moved through these woods, especially now, when rumors had sharpened into action. She chose her direction carefully, angling away from the nearest road, deeper into cover. She did not hurry. She did not leave a straight line. After some time, she did not know how long, she heard a sound that froze her in place. Voices. They were distant, carried faintly through the trees but unmistakable. Men talking low, their words blurred by distance but their tone clear. Patrol, or hunters, or both. Hannah crouched and pressed herself close to the trunk of a tree, becoming part of it. She slowed her breathing, letting the forest sounds reclaim the space around her. The voices moved, drifting past without coming closer. She stayed still long after they had gone, waiting for the echo of their presence to fade. When she moved again, she did so in a new direction, abandoning the path she had planned. The night stretched on. At some point the rain finally came, not heavy but steady enough to soften the ground and blur her tracks. Hannah welcomed it. She moved with renewed confidence, letting the storm do some of the work for her. She walked until her legs ached, until her feet burned, until the sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly. Dawn was approaching. Dawn was dangerous. She needed shelter. Hannah found it in a low hollow where the trees grew thick and close. She slipped inside the shelter of roots and undergrowth, and waited out the coming light, wrapped in darkness and damp earth. She did not sleep. She listened. Morning passed slowly. Somewhere far off, birds called. The forest woke. Hannah remained hidden, knowing that movement in daylight invited eyes. As the sun climbed higher, a thought began to press at the edges of her mind, one she had been holding back since. She stepped through the door. The master. She had left him alive behind her. For years, she had learned how his mind worked, how suspicion festered, how fear turned inward. If he discovered her absence, and he would not stop at anger. He would unleash it, not just on the house, on the quarters, on everyone she had left behind. The realization tightened something in her chest. Hannah had not escaped a system. He had escaped a man who believed in possession, who believed that what he owned could be hunted, retrieved, punished. She knew what he would do with that belief once it was threatened. By the time the afternoon shadows lengthened, Hannah had made a decision she did not name aloud. She retraced her steps as carefully as she had made them, circling wide, keeping cover. The rain had eased, but the ground still bore its marks. She moved as the light softened, using the shifting shadows to hide her return. When she reached the fence again, the house stood as it always had, calm, untroubled, unaware of what had passed through it. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Life continued inside as if nothing had happened. That was the danger. Hannah slipped back through the gap in the fence and moved toward the trees at the edge of the yard, watching the house closely now. Windows glowed faintly as lamps were lit. The back hallway lay dark. She waited until the sounds of evening settled, until the rhythms she knew by heart resumed their places. The master's footsteps crossed the parlor. A door closed. Voices faded. When she approached the back door again, her movements were even more careful than before. This time, she did not feel the latch first. She opened it smoothly and slipped inside, closing it behind her with practiced ease. The house felt different when entered by choice. It no longer loomed. It no longer pressed down. It felt hollow, like a shell. Hannah moved through the back hallway, keeping to the edges, her bare feet silent on the floor. She passed the storage room, the kitchen, the narrow passage that led toward the master's rooms. She stopped where the shadows were thickest and listened. The master was alone. She could tell by the sound of his breathing, by the absence of other movement. He had dismissed the overseer early. He felt secure again, certain that his world was intact. Certainty was a fragile thing. Hannah stepped forward. What happened next was not the sudden explosion people imagined when they spoke of violence. There was no chaos, no wild struggle, no spectacle. There was only the end of a long imbalance. Hannah did not act from rage. Rage was noisy. Rage made mistakes. She acted from resolve, the same resolve that had guided her waiting, her learning, her patience. The master never had time to raise his voice. His certainty failed him in the only moment it mattered. When it was over, the house remained quiet. Hannah stood still for a long moment, listening for any sound that would betray her. None came. The world outside continued as it always had. Wind moving through trees, distant insects calling, a dog barking somewhere far away. She did what she had to do next with the same care she had given everything else. She left nothing that could speak, nothing that could point back toward her or toward anyone else. By the time she stepped back into the back hallway, the house was already becoming something else, a place emptied of its center, its power cut away. It would take time for others to understand what had changed, time Hannah would not give them. She moved quickly now, though not carelessly. She passed through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the yard. The fence welcomed her again. The trees opened their cover. This time she did not stop to listen for voices. This time she did not look back. She walked into the woods with the knowledge that there was no return, no reversal, no path back to what had been. The night closed around her, and the house behind her became only a memory. Dangerous, fading, and finally powerless. By the time the first shouts rose hours later, carried faintly on the morning air, Hannah was already far beyond their reach. She walked until the sun rose high, and the land changed beneath her feet. She walked until the past could no longer keep pace with her, and when she finally stopped, hidden deep where the woods gave way to open land, she understood. Something with absolute clarity. Waiting had ended. What came next would be survival, on her own terms. She moved. The door opened without protest, as if it had been waiting for her hand all along. Hannah stepped through it fully this time, not pausing at the threshold, not looking back. The night closed behind her with a soft click as she eased the door shut, returning the latch to its place the way she had practiced. The house accepted the lie of stillness. Outside, the yard breathed. Clouds pressed low, muting the moon. The air was thick and warm, promising rain that had not yet begun. Hannah stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, letting the dark reveal itself in layers. The fence line lay ahead, a familiar shadow. Trees waited beyond, their leaves barely stirring. Everything was exactly where she expected it to be. That was how she knew she was ready. She crossed the yard, feet finding firmer ground near the edges where the mud was thinner. She moved slowly, not because she was afraid, but because speed belonged to panic, and panic belonged to mistakes. Her body remembered the path, her mind stayed ahead of it. Marking distances, listening for sounds, none came. The house behind her loomed silent and unaware. It felt strange to think of it that way, as something that could be fooled, something that could be left behind. For years it had been the center of her world, the place where everything happened to her. Now it was only a structure of wood and habit, shrinking with every step she took away from it. She reached the fence and stopped. The fence was old, its boards uneven. She had touched it before, leaned against it while working, memorized where it sagged and where it held firm. She slipped between two boards where the gap widened just enough if you turned sideways. The wood scraped lightly against her shoulder, leaving a mark she would carry with her, a reminder of where she had passed through. Beyond the fence, the ground dipped slightly, sloping toward the trees. Hannah moved into their cover and felt the world change around her. The air cooled, the smell shifted, less dust, more earth and leaves. Sound behaved differently here, absorbed instead of carried. She walked until the house was no longer visible, until even its outline disappeared behind the trees. Only then did she stop and let herself breathe deeply. This was the moment she had imagined and avoided imagining in equal measure. The moment when escape became real. The moment when she might have felt triumph or fear or joy. She felt none of those. What she felt was weight. Because escape was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Hannah knew the land beyond the trees better than most would have guessed. She had walked its edges under supervision, learned its rhythms from a distance. She knew which paths led toward roads and which dead-ended in marsh. She knew where the ground turned soft and treacherous after rain. She knew, too, that patrols sometimes moved through these woods, especially now, when rumors had sharpened into action. She chose her direction carefully, angling away from the nearest road, deeper into cover. She did not hurry. She did not leave a straight line. After some time, she did not know how long, she heard a sound that froze her in place. Voices. They were distant, carried faintly through the trees, but unmistakable. Men talking low, their words blurred by distance, but their tone clear. Patrol, or hunters, or both. Hannah crouched and pressed herself close to the trunk of a tree, becoming part of it. She slowed her breathing, letting the forest sounds reclaim the space around her. The voices moved, drifting past without coming closer. She stayed still long after they had gone, waiting for the echo of their presence to fade. When she moved again, she did so in a new direction, abandoning the path she had planned. The night stretched on. At some point, the in finally came. Not heavy, but steady enough to soften the ground and blur her tracks. Hannah welcomed it. She moved with renewed confidence, letting the storm do some of the work for her. She walked until her legs ached, until her feet burned, until the sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly. Dawn was approaching. Dawn was dangerous. She needed shelter. Hannah found it in a low hollow where the trees grew thick and close. She slipped inside the shelter of roots and undergrowth and waited out the coming light, wrapped in darkness and damp earth. She did not sleep. She listened. Morning passed slowly. Somewhere far off, birds called. The forest woke. Hannah remained hidden, knowing that movement in daylight invited eyes. As the sun climbed higher, a thought began to press at the edges of her mind, one she had been holding back since she stepped through the door. The master, she had left him alive behind her. For years she had learned how his mind worked, how suspicion festered, how fear turned inward. If he discovered her absence, and he would not stop at anger. He would unleash it, not just on the house, on the quarters, on everyone she had left behind. The realization tightened something in her chest. Hannah had not escaped a system. She had escaped a man who believed in possession, who believed that what he owned could be hunted, retrieved, punished. She knew what he would do with that belief once it was threatened. By the time the afternoon shadows lengthened, Hannah had made a decision she did not name aloud. She retraced her steps as carefully as she had made them, circling wide, keeping cover. The rain had eased, but the ground still bore its marks. She moved as the light softened, using the shifting shadows to hide her return. When she reached the fence again, the house stood as it always had, calm, untroubled, unaware of what had passed through it. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Life continued inside as if nothing had happened. That was the danger. Hannah slipped back through the gap in the fence and moved toward the trees at the edge of the yard, watching the house closely now. Windows glowed faintly as lamps were lit. The back hallway lay dark. She waited until the sounds of evening settled, until the rhythms she knew by heart resumed their places. The master's footsteps crossed the parlor. A door closed. Voices faded. When she approached the back door again, her movements were even more careful than before. This time she did not feel the latch first. She opened it smoothly and slipped inside, closing it behind her with practiced ease. The house felt different when entered by choice. It no longer loomed. It no longer pressed down. It felt hollow, like a shell. Hannah moved through the back hallway, keeping to the edges, her bare feet silent on the floor. She passed the storage room, the kitchen, the narrow passage that led toward the master's rooms. She stopped where the shadows were thickest and listened. The master was alone. She could tell by the sound of his breathing, by the absence of other movement. He had dismissed the overseer early. He felt secure again, certain that his world was intact. Certainty was a fragile thing. Hannah stepped forward. What happened next was not the sudden explosion people imagined when they spoke of violence. There was no chaos, no wild struggle, no spectacle. There was only the end of a long imbalance. Hannah did not act from rage. Rage was noisy. Rage made mistakes. She acted from resolve. The same resolve that had guided her waiting, her learning, her patience. The master never had time to raise his voice. His certainty failed him in the only moment it mattered. When it was over, the house remained quiet. Hannah stood still for a long moment, listening for any sound that would betray her. None came. The world outside continued as it always had. Wind moving through trees, distant insects calling, a dog barking somewhere far away. She'd die. She had to do next with the same care she had given everything else. She left nothing that could speak, nothing that could point back toward her or toward anyone else. By the time she stepped back into the back hallway, the house was already becoming something else, a place emptied of its center, its power cut away. It would take time for others to understand what had changed. Time Hannah would not give them. She moved quickly now, though not carelessly. She passed through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the yard. The fence welcomed her again. The trees opened their cover. This time she did not stop to listen for voices. This time she did not look back. She walked into the woods with the knowledge that there was no return, no reversal, no path back to what had been. The night closed around her, and the house behind her became only a memory, dangerous, fading, and finally powerless. By the time the first shouts rose hours later, carried faintly on the morning air, Hannah was already far beyond their reach. She walked until the sun rose high and the land changed beneath her feet. She walked until the past could no longer keep pace with her. And when she finally stopped, hidden deep where the woods gave way to open land, she understood something with absolute clarity. Waiting had ended. What came next would be survival on her own terms. She kept moving. The bread the woman had given her was gone by midday, eaten in small pieces as Hannah walked. She did not eat it all at once. Hunger had taught her how to ration hope. Each bite was measured, each swallow taken slowly, as if her body might betray her if she treated kindness too casually. The old road appeared in the afternoon as a thin, worn line cutting through the trees, more suggestion than certainty. It was not the wide path wagons favored. It was narrower, half swallowed by grass, with ruts that seemed years old, the kind of road people used when they wanted to get somewhere without being seen. Hannah stood at the edge of it and watched for a long time. Roads were dangerous for two reasons. They carried people, and people carried stories. But roads also carried directions. They offered a sense of where the world went, a way to measure progress without guessing at the sun. Hannah had spent her life following paths others chose. Now she had to choose for herself, whether to risk a road or risk getting lost. She stepped onto it, not in the center, never in the center. She kept to the edges where grass grew thick, where footprints blurred. Her pace was steady, neither hurried nor slow. Hurried looked guilty, slow looked uncertain, both invited attention. The road curved southward just as the woman had said. It dipped and rose gently through patches of trees and open ground. Every so often, Hannah saw signs of use, a broken twig, a crushed tuft of grass, a small hoofprint hardened in mud. Someone traveled here, not many, but enough. She listened for wagons, she listened for dogs, she listened for voices. Hours passed with nothing but the rustle of leaves and the dull ache in her legs. The sun slid lower, thickening shadows. Hannah began to consider leaving the road before nightfall, finding cover in the trees again. Then she heard it, a distant creak, a faint rhythmic clop. Hannah stepped off the road immediately, melting into the brush as if she had never been there. She crouched low behind a cluster of shrubs and waited. The sound grew closer. A wagon, pulled by a horse, moving slowly, its wheels complaining softly at every turn. Hannah watched through the leaves as it emerged around the bend. A man sat at the front, reins loose in his hands. He looked older, his face lined and tired, his hat pulled low. A woman sat beside him, wrapped in a shawl. Between them, a bundle of something, supplies perhaps. They did not look like patrol. They did not look like hunters. Still, Hannah held her breath. The wagon passed without slowing. The horses' hooves thudded softly on the dirt. The couple talked quietly, their voices too low to understand. Ordinary people, moving through an ordinary day. When the wagon disappeared, Hannah remained crouched for several more minutes, listening for any sign that they had stopped or turned back. Nothing. She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. The world had not noticed her. That was good, and also frightening, because it meant she could keep walking like this, an unseen figure in the edges of roads, until exhaustion took her, or until one wrong encounter ended everything. She stepped back onto the old road and continued. By the second day of travel, Hannah's body began to shift into a different kind of rhythm. The ache in her legs dulled into background noise. Her feet toughened. Hunger sharpened her senses instead of weakening them. She learned to watch the sky for signs of rain, to smell water before she saw it, to recognize when birds fell silent, an omen of something moving through the trees. She also learned something else. The further south she went, the less she understood the land. The trees changed gradually, the undergrowth thickening in new patterns. Farms appeared in the distance, then faded behind her. She saw smoke from chimneys, heard faint barking from unseen yards. She avoided all of it. On the third evening, Hannah found a small abandoned shed near the edge of a field. Its door hung crooked, and the smell inside was stale, but it offered walls and a roof. She settled in the far corner, close to the back, where she could slip out quickly if needed. As she ate a few wild berries and a handful of nuts she had found, she allowed herself to think, carefully, briefly, about the life she might build if she survived, long enough. Not a dream of grand freedom, not a fantasy of safety, something smaller, a place to sleep where no one could enter without permission, a name spoken softly by someone who meant it kindly, work done for wages, not for survival, days where the next hour was not decided by someone else's temper. The thoughts felt dangerous, but they also felt human. Hannah had been denied humanity for so long that even imagining it felt like a rebellion. She fell asleep and woke at dawn to a sound that made her blood run cold. Horses, several, moving fast. Hannah sat up sharply, every muscle tense. The sound was not distant and casual like the wagon before. It was urgent, coordinated, Multiple riders, their hooves beating hard against the ground. A patrol. Hannah pressed herself against the shed's wall and listened, counting the riders by the rhythm of hooves. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. They passed on the main road somewhere not far away, their voices rising briefly as they shouted to one another. Hannah could not understand the words, but she did not need to. The tone carried intent. Search. She waited until the sound faded completely before moving. When she stepped out of the shed, the air felt sharper, as if the world had shifted. The patrol had been near. Too near. Hannah left the old road that day. She angled through trees and uneven ground, moving parallel to where she believed roads ran but refusing to step onto them. It slowed her progress, but speed no longer mattered as much as survival. She drank from streams, careful to leave no obvious traces. She moved in ways that broke patterns, doubling back briefly, then cutting wide around her own path, stepping across rocky ground where prints were harder to see. By late afternoon, she spotted a small settlement in the distance, just a few buildings clustered near a crossroads. It would have been easy to avoid completely, to keep to the woods and pass unseen. But Hannah's hunger had become a steady ache now, and water alone would not sustain her forever. She needed food she did not have to hunt. She needed something to trade, a needle, a ribbon, a coin. She had none of those. The decision she made felt like stepping on thin ice. At dusk, she approached the settlement cautiously, staying to the tree line until she could see details. A general store, a small church, a few homes. No signs of a large militia presence, no obvious patrol. Still, danger lived in ordinary places, too. Hannah waited until she saw movement that told her who lived here. Children running between houses, a woman hanging cloth on a line, a man carrying a sack of grain. The normal rhythms of life. She moved closer, stopping behind a fence where shadows gathered. Her eyes locked on the store. Stores meant food. Stores also meant questions. Hannah did not walk in. Instead, she waited for someone to come out alone. It took time. Patience was still her weapon. Finally, a young boy stepped out carrying a small bundle. He walked away from the store toward a side path, alone. Hannah stepped out from behind the fence, careful not to startle him too sharply. The boy froze, eyes wide. He was older than a child, but young enough to be easily frightened. "I won't hurt you," Hannah said softly, the same words she had used before. They were becoming a kind of shield. The boy swallowed, staring at her clothes, her face, her posture. "Who are you?" he whispered. Hannah did not answer. Names were dangerous. "I'm hungry," she said instead. "Do you have anything you can spare?" The boy glanced back toward the store, then back at her. His fear wrestled with something else, curiosity maybe, or compassion. He shifted his bundle in his hands. "My mama," he began, then stopped. Hannah kept her hands visible, open. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly. "I just need food." The boy hesitated, then slowly untied his bundle and pulled out a piece of bread and a small wrapped portion of cheese. He held them out at arm's length. Hannah took them carefully as if accepting something fragile. "Thank you," she said. The boy stared at her a moment longer. They're looking for someone," he whispered. "Riders. They came earlier." Hannah's stomach tightened. "What did they say?" The boy's eyes flicked to the side again, as if afraid someone would hear. "They said someone ran. They said bad things." "Bad things." Hannah understood what that meant. "Did they come back?" she asked. "Not yet," the boy said, "but they will. They always do." Hannah nodded, absorbing the information like water into dry ground. "Go back," she said gently. "Forget you saw me." The boy hesitated, then turned and hurried away, clutching his bundle as if it could protect him. Hannah stepped back into the shadows, chewing slowly, forcing herself not to devour the food too quickly. The bread tasted like life. The cheese tasted like risk. She left the settlement immediately, circling wide, moving into deeper cover. Night swallowed her again. As she walked, she realized something important. She could not survive alone forever. Not because she lacked strength. She had more strength than anyone here could imagine. But because the world was not built for someone like her to move unseen indefinitely. Roads connected people. People shared news. Patrols repeated their routes. If she continued like this, she would eventually cross the wrong person at the wrong time. She needed, not safety exactly. Safety was too large a word. She needed allies. But allies were hard to find when you had no name and no proof and no reason for anyone to risk themselves. The thought pressed in as she traveled over the next several days. She avoided settlements and roads, keeping to wild spaces. Her hunger returned quickly. The boy's food had only delayed it. She ate what she could find, rationed water, slept in short bursts. The world felt like a net being tightened around her, not because she could see it, but because she could feel it in the changing air. More riders on distant roads, more barking dogs, more tension in voices carried on wind. On the 6th day, she came across a small camp in the woods. Not a farm, not a settlement. Just a fire ringed with stones, ash still warm, footprints around it. Someone had been here recently. The scent of smoke lingered. Hannah crouched and studied the prints. Boots, multiple, not heavy like patrol, lighter, careful. People who knew how to move quietly. She followed the faint trail deeper into the trees, not stepping directly in the prints, keeping distance. The trail led to a thicket where voices murmured softly. Hannah stopped and listened. A woman's voice. 2 men, low, controlled, not laughing, not shouting, a different kind of group. Hannah held still, weighing risk against possibility. Her heart pounded with a tension she could barely contain. If these were hunters, she was walking into a trap. If they were something else, something rare, this might be the chance she needed. She took 1 step forward, then another, careful not to snap a twig. Still, a sound betrayed her, a leaf crunching underfoot. The voices stopped instantly. A figure emerged from the thicket, a man holding a rifle, not raised but ready. His eyes scanned the darkness. "Who's there?" he called softly, but his voice had steel. Hannah stepped out slowly, hands raised. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she said, steadying her voice. The man's gaze narrowed. Another figure moved behind him, watching. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the man said. Hannah obeyed, standing still. A woman stepped into view, older, sharp-eyed. She studied Hannah's face the way the other woman had, but with a different kind of recognition. Not pity, assessment. "You're running," the woman said, not as a question. Hannah swallowed. "Yes." The woman's gaze flicked over Hannah's clothes, her posture, her feet. "From where?" Hannah hesitated. Names were dangerous. "You said trouble is looking," the woman said at last. "What kind of trouble?" Hannah chose her words carefully. "The kind that rides," she said. "The kind that asks questions after it has already decided the answers. Tay, you move with us. You follow our rules." Hannah nodded without hesitation. "I know how." Night deepened as they worked. The fire was extinguished, carefully, its ashes scattered. Belongings were packed into small bundles, nothing unnecessary, nothing heavy. Hannah took her place among them without being told, mirroring their movements, learning their rhythm. They moved before dawn, slipping through the trees in a staggered line. No one spoke. Each person watched a different angle, covering ground the way people did when they trusted one another with their lives. Hannah felt something unfamiliar settle into her bones. Belonging, not comfort, not safety, but alignment. As they walked, whispers followed them. Not real ones, but the echo of what Hannah knew was spreading behind her. Stories shaped by fear traveled faster than people ever could. She imagined the words being passed from mouth to mouth. Runaway, dangerous, example. She imagined her identity bending and twisting until it no longer resembled her. She would become a shadow in those stories, a warning. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a shallow valley. Ruth signaled for them to stop. They crouched low, scanning the land. Eli pointed to a distant line of dust. "Riders," he murmured. Hannah followed his gaze. The figures were far away, but their movement was unmistakable, organized, deliberate. "They're splitting up," Jonah whispered. "Covering ground," Ruth cursed softly. "They're serious." Hannah felt a familiar tightening in her chest. "They won't stop," she said. "Not now." Ruth glanced at her. "Why?" Hannah hesitated, then answered with the truth she had been carrying since the night she left. "Because it isn't just about me," she said. "It's about control. If they don't make me an example, others might think they can leave too." Ruth nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." They moved again, angling away from the riders, choosing rougher terrain. The pace quickened. Hannah kept up, though her muscles screamed. She did not complain. Complaints cost time. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow gorge where the land fell away sharply. Ruth paused at the edge, scanning the opposite side. "This is where we split," she said quietly. Jonah's head snapped up. "What?" Ruth turned to Hannah. "They're following you," she said. "Not us, not yet." Hannah understood immediately. Her presence had shifted the hunter's focus. "You'll draw them east," Ruth continued. "We'll go west, deeper into cover. If they chase you, they won't find us." Hannah's heart pounded. "You're asking me to be bait." Ruth did not deny it. "I'm asking you to choose." The choice was brutal in its clarity. If she stayed, she risked exposing them all. If she left, she faced the riders alone again, weakened by days of travel. Hannah looked at the faces around her, tired, wary, alive. People who had taken a risk on her without knowing her story fully. "I'll go," she said. Jonah swore. "You can't." "I can," Hannah said, her voice steady. "I've been running alone this whole time. I can do it again." Ruth stepped closer, lowering her voice. If you survive, she said, head south. There are people there who help the ones no one else will. Look for the river bend where the water slows. Hannah nodded, committing words to memory. Ruth reached out and pressed something into Hannah's hand, a small knife, worn smooth with use. For cutting, she said simply. Hannah closed her fingers around it, feeling its weight. Thank you. Ruth held her gaze. Live. They parted without ceremony. No goodbyes. No promises. Hannah turned east, descending into the gorge, choosing a path that would leave a clear trail. She moved faster now, deliberately breaking the careful patterns she had learned. She wanted to be seen, wanted the riders to follow. As she climbed out on the other side, she heard it. Distant shouts, the bark of dogs carried faintly on the wind. They had taken the bye. Hannah ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled. She ran through brush and over rock, letting branches tear at her clothes, leaving signs she would normally erase. She ran until the world narrowed to breath and movement and the pounding certainty that there was no turning back. As night fell, she forced herself to slow, to think again. Panic would kill her faster than any rider. She veered sharply south, doubling back briefly before cutting across rocky ground where tracks would fade. She moved into darkness with practiced ease, letting the shadows swallow her. Behind her, the hunt continued. Ahead of her lay a river bend and a promise she did not yet understand. Hannah disappeared into the night, carrying whispers with her and leaving shadows behind. The river announced itself before Hannah saw it. She heard it first, a low, steady sound that did not hurry or hesitate. Water moving over stone, patient and unbothered by pursuit. After days of running through land that shifted and threatened, the constancy of that sound felt unreal, like a promise whispered too calmly to be trusted. Hannah slowed as she approached, forcing her body out of the urgency of flight. Panic had carried her far, but it could not carry her safely. She moved carefully now, stepping through reeds and damp earth, letting the sound of the water mask her presence. The river bent exactly as Ruth had described. It widened slightly at the curve, the current easing where it met a bank thick with willow and tall grass. The far side rose into a low ridge, wooded and dark. Hannah crouched near the water's edge and drank deeply, cupping her hands and letting the cold settle her racing pulse. She was shaking, not from fear alone but from release. Behind her, the hunt was still alive. She could feel it in the tension that lingered in the air, in the way her muscles refused to fully relax. But here, at the bend, the world felt different, less owned, less watched. Hannah waited. Minutes passed, then longer. She listened for dogs, for hooves, for voices carried across water. None came. At last, she stood and followed the riverbank southward, staying close to the water but not on it. Tracks vanished easily near rivers, scents scattered, sound dissolved into flow. By mid-morning, she noticed signs that she was no longer alone. Not people, at least not yet, but intention. A narrow path, barely visible, pressed into the grass. A branch tied with twine, marked in a way that was not accidental. A stone placed atop another where it would not naturally balance. Signals. Hannah stopped, heart thudding. Ruth had said there were people here who helped the ones no one else would. Hannah did not call out. She did not step into the open. Instead, she waited beside the river, visible enough to be found but not so exposed that she could not run. It took longer than she expected. The sun climbed higher. Insects buzzed lazily. Hannah began to wonder if she had misunderstood the signs, if they were remnants of something old, abandoned, like the road she had followed days earlier. Then the reeds moved. A woman emerged first, older than Hannah, her hair streaked with gray, her posture straight despite the years etched into her face. She held no weapon, but her eyes missed nothing. Behind her, two others appeared, one man, one woman, both alert, both quiet. They did not rush toward Hannah. They did not speak. They waited. Hannah stepped forward slowly, hands visible. She had done this before, but this time it felt different. This time she was not asking to pass through. She was asking to stay. I was told to come here, she said, keeping her voice calm, by a woman named Ruth. The older woman's eyes sharpened. Ruth doesn't give directions lightly. Hannah nodded. She said you help people who can't go back. Silence stretched between them. Finally, the woman inclined her head slightly. My name is Clara, she said, and you look like someone who's been running a long time. Hannah did not deny it. Clara studied her a moment longer, then gestured toward the ridge. Come, she said, before someone else hears you breathing. They moved quickly but not hurriedly, leading Hannah up a narrow trail hidden by brush. At the top of the ridge, the land opened into a small concealed settlement. Half a dozen rough structures nestled among trees, smoke rising faintly from one chimney. People moved quietly, purposefully. Children's laughter drifted from somewhere deeper inside, quickly hushed but unmistakably real. Hannah felt something in her chest crack open. Not relief, recognition. They brought her water, then food. Real food, warm and filling. They did not ask questions while she ate. They watched, yes, but without suspicion. With care. When she finished, Clara sat across from her. "You're safe for now," Clara said, "but for now is all anyone gets." Hannah nodded. She had never believed in permanent safety. "They'll keep looking," Clara continued, "not forever, but long enough that you can't be who you were." Hannah understood immediately. "I don't want to be," she said. Clara's gaze softened slightly. "Then you'll need to choose." "Choose what?" "A name," Clara said. "And with it, a way of living that doesn't call the past back to you." Hannah looked down at her hands. They were scarred, strong, shaped by years of work and waiting. They belonged to someone who had survived things that should have destroyed her. "Hannah isn't really mine," she said quietly. Clara nodded. "Then leave it behind." The choice felt heavier than any she had made before. Heavier than opening the door, heavier than running, heavier than fighting, because this choice was not about escape. It was about becoming. Hannah closed her eyes. She thought of silence, of patience, of the way water moved around obstacles instead of breaking against them. When she opened her eyes, she said, "Call me River." Clara smiled faintly. "A good name," she said. "It keeps moving." Life did not suddenly become easy. River learned new rules, different ones, but rules all the same. She worked alongside others, planting, repairing, carrying, learning how to exist without being commanded. She learned which paths were safe and which were watched. She learned how messages traveled quietly between places like this, how warnings were passed without being spoken aloud. At night, she slept without listening for footsteps in a hallway. Instead, she listened to wind in trees, to water moving nearby, to the steady breathing of people who chose to be where they were. The world beyond the ridge did not forget her immediately. Riders passed nearby more than once. Dogs were heard in the distance. But time wore the edges off urgency. New fears replaced old ones. The hunt thinned, then scattered, then ended. Not with a declaration, but with absence. River remained. She grew stronger. "E for now," she would say. Not because it was a promise, but because it was true.